What's up, everybody? Hope everyone's having a good day. It's the middle of 2024, and we're staring down the barrels of another big presidential election, and there's just way too many politicians and big races running in this election to keep up with. So, I'm breaking out a handy little guide for you guys, starting with all the Senate races for this election, then moving on to the congressional races. If I have time, I'm going to try to cover all the politicians running for Senate in 2024 across the country and as many of the congressional ones as I can. The premise is simple. I'm going to honestly let you guys know what these politicians' platforms are, what they believe in, a little bit about their lives, and what they plan to do when they get in office. Now, all the information I get from these videos pretty much comes straight from the politicians or their campaigns, from their speeches and public statements they've made, if they've ever been an elected official before, from their actual record as being an elected official. So everything on here should be accurate. Should give you a little picture of what these candidates are about, who they are, and what they plan to do if you elect them. So let's get started. I wanted to do these videos because I feel like there's so much misleading information out there about what all the candidates running for election are all about. And, when you're looking to see who you're going to vote for and you just need a real quick, honest rundown, then it's really kind of hard to find that. So first I'll be covering all the Senate races for 2024 if I get through those before November. Hopefully cover a few congressional races as well. Now, I do have a little bit of a background in politics myself, both my college degree and my working career experience I've had so far, but at the end of the day, all the information I'm going over can be pretty easily found if you look for it, but now you can just go to one place to get it. Alright, so first up, we've got the Senate elections for 2024 in the good state of Arizona. Well, good is subjective, I guess. The capital, of course, being Phoenix, the city that Peggy Hill once famously called a testament to man's arrogance. Probably one of the few things that Peggy Hill got right in that show. So, current Senator of Arizona, Kristen Sinema, most famously known for changing her political beliefs at the drop of a hat, is vacating her seat. So, there's one to run for. Got a couple of Republicans up for it, and one Democrat in particular that we're going to cover. Now, I'm only going to cover the politicians who have a good chance of making it through their primaries. And of course, after the primaries, I'll just be covering the general election candidates. So here in Arizona, for this empty Senate seat, we just got 3 candidates who even got a chance of making it past their primaries. 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat. Let's get into it. Oh, the Republican Party. All the dangers of a drunken elephant stumbling through town without any of the fun. First up, let's go ahead and get the 2 Republican candidates vying for this empty Senate seat out of the way. Let's see what they're all about. See if they are even halfway qualified to be a senator. All right, the first of only 2 candidates who have a chance of making it through the Republican primary in AZ. We've got Mark Lamb, fella who is currently a sheriff in Pinal County, Arizona. I think that's how you say it, Pinal. I'll try not to say the county name much. Yeah, so Mark's a sheriff, had a career as a law enforcement officer for the most part, and got a picture of him smiling, dressed up as a cowboy, pointing his gun. He loves dressing up as a cowboy. I don't think he is one, so I guess it's just another kind of cosplaying. And he loves his guns. Nothing particularly wrong with that on the surface, but we'll dive a little deeper into that later. Got this nice little protester with a megaphone on the wrong end of the gun, because there is nothing Mark Lamb loves more than violence against peaceful protesters. Absolutely loves it by his own admittance. So we'll get into that here in a second. So here in this picture, we've got Mark Lamb just about as happy as he can be, dressed as a cowboy, his favorite way to dress, holding a gun, his favorite thing to hold, pointing it at a peaceful protester, his favorite thing to point it at. Alright, so let's check out Mark Lamb a little bit more, see what he's all about. If you look right above me, I've got 3 pictures of him in his sheriff uniform that he loves to wear. But Mark was actually born in Hawaii, raised there for most of his childhood. His family did end up moving abroad a little bit to the Philippines and to Panama before they came back to the States, settled in Arizona. That's where he's been since. Well, Mark is a husband, a father, and a grandfather actually, 51 years old, and a practicing Mormon. No, I'd say for the most part, somebody's religion isn't really that important when looking at them as an elected official, but for something like Mormonism, we should take a pause because electing a Mormon is kind of the equivalent to electing a Scientologist, honestly. I actually lived with a Mormon family for a little while when I was studying abroad, and I went to church with them and everything, and I actually had to read the Book of Mormon myself, and wow, that is a wild read. Anyway, let's take a look at old Mark's career. So he's been a cop, pretty much through most of his professional life. That's been his career. But before that, he actually was a small local business owner, owned a couple of small businesses, even kept one for at least a little while after becoming a cop. He actually trained at the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office in Arizona, which, if that sounds familiar, that's because Maricopa County is where the infamous Joe Arpaio, I think is his last name, was the sheriff. Joe was more so infamous than famous, mostly infamous for being about as racist as a man could be. Um, Joe was the kind of guy that believed the best thing for America was to lock up all the Mexicans, and he was the kind of guy that would sentence you to 40 years of hard labor for a dime bag of weed. So that's whose sheriff office Mark Lamb trained at. Anyway, he ended up working as a police officer in the place where he later became sheriff, actually 5 years after he started working there, Pinal County, hope I'm pronouncing that right, Arizona. Fairly moderately sized county, not too big, not too small. From what I can see through most of his career as a policeman, he did a lot of drug enforcement work, big surprise. Um, did a lot of work regarding, trying to curb illegal border crossings, did a lot of work against cartel activity in the area. But he really started making headlines, of course, when he became sheriff. Honestly, more so for the things he'd say than the things he did. His time as sheriff honestly seems to have been pretty uneventful. But Mark made some national headlines, during the COVID quarantine for railing against and refusing to enforce even the tiniest COVID measures. He thought that politely asking people to wear masks was, the equivalent of Nazi-esque fascism. He's the kind of guy who thinks that hand sanitizer is liberal witchcraft. So he made some headlines for that. Also, during the Black Lives Matter protests around 2020 or so, he made a bunch of headlines for coming out and organizing a civilian posse to deal with the Black Lives Matter protesters and saying things like, oh, these protesters are a huge danger. We need to be ready to use extreme force. We need to be able to use force against them. They're a terror, all that. Now, I should interject with a couple of little facts here. First of all, it's just plain objective fact that the vast majority of the Black Lives Matter protests across the country were peaceful. That's indisputable fact. And then the even more damning fact for Mark Lamb is that he was railing against these, Black Lives Matter protests, organized a civilian posse to deal with them, was ready to use lethal force. And you know what? In his county, where he was sheriff, there was not a single Black Lives Matter protest, not one. And he organized a civilian posse to deal with them. So he was just complaining about nothing. This guy just likes to whine. Oh, and I'm sure that civilian posse that he formed just to deal with Black Lives Matter protests, I'm sure that was just filled with outstanding individuals, not a racist in the bunch, I can guarantee. So, from what I can tell, Mark Lamb thinks that the greatest threat to American peace and prosperity are peaceful protesters protesting against racism. But anyway, that's his career. Small business owner, cop to sheriff in a moderately sized county. So, he is an elected official, and sheriff is elected, but no legislative experience, no lawmaking experience, no real political experience. Senator, that's about as big an elected position as we have, really. I'd say only president is probably bigger, and so to jump from sheriff of a moderately sized county to a senator, that's a big ask for somebody. That's like asking somebody to go from EMT to orthopedic surgeon. So I don't know. Mark's not seeming super qualified, honestly. But let's get a little bit deeper into this. Let's talk about his political beliefs, as stated by his campaign and him himself. So is very conservative, but he's not really your traditional conservative. He's more your MAGA conservative, your QAnon conservative. That your kind of new breed of conservative is more what he is. Very pro Second Amendment, of course, and not only is he pro Second Amendment, but he believes that there should be no restrictions, no regulations. Now I know some people might jump for joy at this, but think about that for a second. Mark thinks that you get out of an insane asylum, the next day you should be able to go buy yourself a gun, and legally conceal carry it. He thinks, you get arrested for second-degree murder, you spend 20 years in jail, you get out, the next day you should be able to buy a gun, legally conceal carry it. So Mark's ideas on the Second Amendment are honestly pretty extreme. He doesn't want police to have any independent oversight. Wants police to have the ability to get away with mass arresting protesters, even if they're peaceful. Wants police to be able to beat people and kill them if they're protesting peacefully or, not resisting arrest at all. So he really wants police to have runaway authority, like completely uncontrolled. He, of course, is anti-reproductive rights. It really seems, from what I can gather from his campaign statements too, that he'd be very fine with not allowing an exception for rape or incest. He could be talked into not allowing an exception even if the mother's life is in danger. So completely anti-reproductive health, anti-choice. Definitely seems like the kind of guy that could be convinced that condoms should be illegal. Believes woke ideology in schools is indoctrinating children and running rampant across the country. And there is zero evidence that woke ideology is running rampant through the schools in our country. There's zero evidence that it's a common thing in our schools. I don't know where all these people are getting this. Anyway, so that being said, of course, Mark wants to dismantle public education. He would prefer that children are taught that the earth was formed 2,000 years ago by God, and that cavemen and dinosaurs lived together happily. That's the kind of education he would prefer to have his children to have, his grandchildren to have. Mark's the kind of guy who thinks the teacher should be arrested for teaching kids that slavery happened. Not really your environmentalist candidate. He doesn't talk much about the environment, but, he thinks that environmental regulations are gobbledygook, thinks climate change is a liberal hoax, so he'll be doing nothing about that. And Arizona's already hot as the sun, and it's only getting hotter, and you guys are only losing more and more of what little water you've got. He has a lot of general political goals like back the blue, end reproductive health care, get woke ideology out of school, but he really doesn't have any specific policy agendas or ideas on how to move legislation forward or anything like that. Policies on voting and democracy are pretty vague, but he definitely seems to be one of those people who wants to restrict voting access rather than making voting easier. And he is, a supporter of the January 20th rioters, actually called them very loving Christian people. He is one of the Stop the Steal people. So, that says that Mark might have a problem with democratic elections. If he's one of the Stop the Steal the people, despite just the insurmountable objective evidence that the election wasn't stolen from Trump, then that means that Mark's not super interested in getting the candidate getting elected that got the most votes. He's just interested in his candidate getting elected and getting put in power, whether or not they got the votes or not. So something to think about. But that's pretty much it when it comes to Mark. In summation, hyper conservative, big QAnon guy, doesn't believe businesses or guns or healthcare, or really anything should have any regulations on it. Pretty much thinks that society should just be a free for all. Basically, his policy is basically whatever Trump wants or whatever the latest QAnon on board is saying. Doesn't seem to have a terrible record as a sheriff, but definitely did some really questioning things during the COVID lockdown and tried to do some questioning things during the Black Lives Matters protests. Thank God none of them actually came to his county. But he definitely doesn't seem like he has what it takes to be a senator, just looking at his record and his experience. All right, next up we got the second Republican candidate hoping to win the primary and face up against the Democrat in the general election in Arizona this year, Carrie Lake. Yeah, I say second, but she's actually polling quite a bit ahead of Mark Lamb. It's looking like she'll probably be the candidate right now. She's also the more famous one, for pretty dubious reasons, honestly. I see this nice little picture I've got over here. That's her in court because she is a criminal. And I'll be honest, Carrie Lake is a real piece of work. The only reason her campaign slogan isn't democracy, not if I can help it, is because her lawyers and campaign public relations rep advised against it. Carrie Lake is about as an extreme a candidate who probably exists in any of the big races this year. To put it in a little bit of perspective, Republicans in Arizona choosing Carrie Lake as their candidate for Senate is pretty much about the same as leftists in Arizona deciding to dig up Leon Trotsky's grave and make him their Senate candidate. Like, you can't get much crazier than Carrie Lake. And, she's winning all the primary polls so far. She's definitely one of the craziest QAnon MAGA people to ever exist. The Trumpiest Trumper to ever Trump. Most people are at least probably mildly familiar with her efforts to commit election fraud during two different elections. First, when Biden beat Trump, she tried to give Biden's electoral votes to Trump, even though Biden won in Arizona. And then, again, when she lost the gubernatorial race in Arizona to Katie Hobbs, she tried to steal that election, even though she had fewer votes. So, already tried to commit election fraud twice. So yeah, she's insane. Mark Lamb is the kind of guy who would install Trump as dictator for life in a second if you gave him the power to. He's still not half the nutcase that Carrie Lake is. The fact that she is still the favored candidate in the Republican primary just goes to show how crazy right wing, radical right wing the Republican Party is now. Like, oh my gosh. If these people go much farther to the right, they're going to circle back around and end up on the left. But anyway, let's see what makes Carrie tick. Let's see, what makes her so crazy. Just a few general points about her personal life. She's 54, slightly the oldest candidate. She's a mother on her second marriage, nothing wrong with that. She's born and raised in Illinois, and she grew up Catholic. Had a brief stint as a Buddhist, by her own self-admission. That was, when she was in her 20s. I'm sure we all had a period like that in our 20s. But, that didn't last very long, and instead of going back to being Catholic, she decided to be an evangelical Christian. Whether she's a real evangelical or not, honestly, who knows? Maybe not even Carrie. Alright, let's keep on taking a look at Carrie. Let's take a look at her career. What's led her up to this point? What kind of stuff has she done? What are her qualifications for being a senator? So let's start with her schooling. So she actually did get a bachelor's degree from the University of Iowa in journalism. Very nice. And then after that, she actually became a local TV news reporter and a local weather person. She ended up becoming a weather anchor after a few years, and eventually actually was offered a job in New York City as an evening news anchor, covering a lot of political news and just other national headlines. And then after doing that for a few years, she was offered a job in Phoenix doing the same thing, evening news anchor, again, covering a lot of political topics in particular. So, she hasn't worked as a politician, she hasn't worked alongside any politicians, but she has covered politics, in her career as a journalist for quite a while. Although it should be noted that, she hasn't been doing more so the in-depth journalism, say a reporter at like the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune. She just covers the news on TV as kind of investigated by others. But still, looks like she had a pretty good career in TV journalism. She ended up being a news anchor in Phoenix for quite a while. Did that through most of the 2000s, right up until about the time that Trump was elected for his first term, actually. But since working as an evening news anchor, she really hasn't done anything. The two things she's really most famous for since then are two failed attempts at overthrowing elections. First, when she tried to give the Arizona electoral votes to Trump, and then when she tried to claim that she won the gubernatorial race against Katie Hobbs, when in fact she lost the Arizona gubernatorial race against Katie Hobbs. And really all she does now is post information on social media that can be disproven with like a 5-second Google search. So Carrie's really fallen off. And at the end of the day, while, like I said, she did have a pretty impressive career in TV journalism, I still don't see much there that would qualify you for being a senator. She covered political news as an evening anchor, yes, but that's a far cry from actually working in politics, working with laws and legislation, working closely with politicians. So, can I say that I feel like this person's qualified to be a U.S. Senator? No. I think any reasonable person would say no. But let's keep going. Let's look at those political beliefs. Now, Carrie Lake is, as you guys can imagine, extremely conservative, but she's not your traditional conservative. She's your MAGA, QAnon conservative. So she's your, Jewish space lasers, Pizzagate kind of conservative. She's the fact that gay people exist is destroying families kind of conservative. So, with that being said, she is evangelical, or at least pretends to be. In terms of Second Amendment rights, she doesn't talk about it too much, but she is for no gun restrictions or regulations of any kind. So, kind of like Mark Lamb, she thinks she should be able to get out of the asylum, go buy a pistol, be able to conceal carry it. She believes, say you're serving 20 years for second-degree murder, you should be able to get out, get all the guns and ammo you want as soon as you get out. Wants to build the border wall, honestly, only because Trump wants to. And again, even if you're somebody who thinks that there should be less illegal immigration at the Mexico-USA border, the border wall is still the dumbest and least cost-effective way to do that. Any solution that can be overcome by a ladder is not the right solution. There are countless videos on YouTube and other platforms of people using really cheap methods to get over these border walls. They don't work. Of course, she's anti-reproductive rights, anti-choice, and from what she said, it really does seem like she could be convinced that there doesn't need to be an abortion exception, for rape and incest, or in the case of the mother's life being in danger. She is very extreme on her anti-reproductive health platform. Most people in the USA aren't even close to as extreme as she is. Of course, she believes that woke ideology in schools is indoctrinating children, and it's rampant. It's happening all over the country. Carrie probably thinks there's a litter box in every classroom, and kids are changing gender on a weekly basis. Of course, there's no evidence for any of these things that she believes, but she believes them because she wants to, like a lot of people, unfortunately. And so she wants to destroy public education. She wants to make teaching that slavery happened illegal, and she wants to deny the existence of LGBTQ plus kids. So she definitely wouldn't be good for our education system, or the Arizona's education system. She's definitely not your environmentalist candidate. She doesn't want any regulations on, pollution or anything like that. She doesn't want to encourage renewable energy. She doesn't believe in climate change. I'm about 70% certain she believes cavemen and humans walk the earth together. I mean, cavemen and dinosaurs walk the earth together, so not much of a facts and science person. And going over her political beliefs, one of the clearest things is that she just has a real problem, especially seeing that, she tried to commit election fraud. She just has a real problem with the truth. And your political leanings aside, whether you're conservative or, liberal, that's a real problem when somebody running for such an important office just can't handle the truth, or like can't handle objective fact. And I think more of us need to wake up to that fact. She doesn't really talk much about international policy, but one thing she had made clear is that she thinks China is an enemy, which, okay, I understand. The Chinese government has a lot to answer for. They are not a force for righteousness. But it's clear that she has no idea actually how to compete against China or how to combat their influence. I assume she'd probably want to do the same thing Trump did with all his China tariffs that honestly ended up hurting America a lot more than they ended up hurting China. So she just She has like some vague ideas about what she wants to do when she gets in office, but she doesn't have any really specific plans or ideas on how to push legislation through or reach across the aisle. So I'm sure she doesn't want to reach across the aisle. It's just so clear that she's gunning for a job that she's not qualified for. But she is the favored Republican candidate in Arizona right now. She will probably get through the primaries. And, Arizona is a state where in elections like this, it's really hard to tell whether the Republican or the Democratic candidate are going to win. She could end up being the next Arizona senator. In that case, I just can't see that going well for Arizonans. There's almost no way she's going to do right by them. All right, so after talking about Carrie Lake and Mark Lamb, that finally leads us to the last serious candidate we have to cover for the open Senate race here in 2024 in Arizona, and that's the one Democrat. As much as the donkey could possibly actually be an excellent symbol for the Democratic Party, I feel like Donkey from Shrek really would be a great mascot. Often well meaning, but oh man, the execution is really lacking a lot of the time. But let's dive into the candidate that it looks like the Democrats are going to put up for the general election in Arizona. His name is Ruben Gallego. Let's see how he stacks up. All right, let's go over some basics about Ruben first. The youngest serious candidate for the AC Senate race at 44. Ruben was actually born in Chicago, second generation American with a Colombian mother and a Mexican father. Attended Harvard University where he got a bachelor's in international relations. Very nice. Served in the Marines in Iraq. Currently on his second marriage, got 2 kids. Let's take a look at that career. All right, so as I already said, Gallego attended Harvard, got a bachelor's there, served in the Army, and then he went on to get into local Arizona politics really after that. He served as the chief of staff for a Phoenix City councilman for a little while. Eventually, he became elected to the Arizona State Senate himself. From all accounts, he did pretty well there, even became the assistant minority leader for a little while. He rose through the ranks and became elected as a U.S. congressman. In 2015, he's still a congressman today, so he's already in the House of Representatives. He's just going for the Senate now. When in the House of Representatives, his first successful bill granted in-state tuition status to veterans residing in Arizona. Awesome stuff there. In the U.S. House, he's been on the Armed Services Committee and the Committee for National Resources. He was also the chairman of a subcommittee, the one on intelligence and special operations. So he's been in the House of Representatives for a few years, and he's put in some work. He got a bill that he drafted passed. He supported some important legislation, and he's putting in work on quite a few committees and subcommittees. So let's look about what we do know about his political beliefs. He's definitely a moderate in terms of, on the left to right political scale, center left Democrat. Nothing extremely leftist about him at all. One quick thing to note, in the U.S. House of Representatives, he's voted in line with President Biden's stated position 100% of the time so far. He definitely seems to have a particular focus on improving conditions for Native Americans. Interesting. He's pro-choice, pro-reproductive health care. Lately has been calling for enshrining reproductive health care rights in the Arizona state constitution. A believer in capitalism, but also a believer in some regulation to keep corporations from running amok and turning our world into a generic sci-fi dystopia. Big workers' rights proponent, big supporter of a livable wage, wants to close corporate tax loopholes, believes climate change should be rapidly and strongly addressed through legislation. Seems like a decent candidate for environmentalists, although environmentalism doesn't seem to be a top priority for him. Wants to invest more in our public education system and our teachers, provide them with more resources. He supports Medicaid expansion, bringing down drug prices through legislation. He is a Second Amendment supporter, but he does believe in some very basic, common sense regulations like expanded background checks. He does think that China, Russia, and Iran are adversaries to the USA, which, makes sense. But he believes that competition and, you know, combating them in any way should be done in a very measured and careful way. pro LGBTQ plus rights, very against LGBTQ plus discrimination. And I should say too that that is very much the opposite of Mark Lamb and Carrie Lake. Both of them have expressed their disdain for the LGBTQ plus community. Seems like both of them would just be perfectly happy to see that community disappear. And when it comes to immigration, Ruben Gallego does believe that there needs to be a better path for legal immigration, that, asylum seekers can't be turned down, and he is against extreme border policies like, police being able to ask somebody for immigration status papers, on a routine traffic stop. He obviously doesn't think that kids crossing the border should be put in cages, but he does believe that we should be taking some responsible measures to stem the flow of illegal immigrants at the U.S.-Mexico border. He's successfully advocated in the past for increased resources to border communities to deal with the influx of illegal immigrants. So basically, my rundown on Ruben Gallego is he's worked in politics for a long time. He's been an elected official, both a more local scale in Arizona State Senate and on a national scale in the House of Representatives right now. He's got a proven track record of getting legislation passed and supporting important legislation that anybody can look up. Um, he seems like a solid candidate in a lot of ways. He's, a center-left candidate. He's not extreme in any way. He's a veteran, of course, and he doesn't seem to harbor any ill will against any group or set of people. And I think it's such a big thing that he's a genuinely experienced politician because, as much as people hate to admit it, that makes a real positive difference. That means he's better equipped to do the job if he's elected. All right, so yeah, that's it. Those are the Arizona Senate candidates for 2024. Thanks for watching, guys. Next video, California Senate candidates. Should be coming out in a few days. Probably going to play around with the presentation style. First couple of videos. Might just overlay some audio over me playing something on my Xbox for the next one, honestly. Give you something a little better to look at. Anyway, appreciate y'all. Hope you catch the next video.